France is the only place that has Amazon Prime, where Amazon Prime does not have a specific amount of time that it gets you. So in the UK, for example, Amazon Prime is the next day. It's just next day. But in France, it's quicker. But that version of quicker is next day, or it's just 1 week instead of 2.
Right.
Because French logistics doesn't work in that, that Japanese or that North American model of like, we have to have something now. The price of a baguette and the price of a croissant is standardized.
Oh, really?
You can find places that charge more for them, but generally French people don't, because purchasing decisions are not as liberal in France as they are in, say, like the United States. But also because of that, what you find in France is that there's this, when you look at like the American version of like a free market model, there's the idea of like markets will decide this, markets will decide like this.
Yeah,
so, if you have a croissant, whoever has the best croissant at the best price will succeed.
That's what I have paid $7 for a croissant.
Right. Exactly. And that's an illusion, right? Because you'll pay $7 and the value attributed to that compared to a $1 croissant, only you can decide whether it's worth $6 or not. And there are so many other factors to that, like convenience, and do you have enough money to just take that spot on that great street that makes it more utilitarian or more useful, right? But with Paris, what you find is that because so many of those things are protected, because also the price point is kept low, so a lot of these makes it more accessible, which means it stays a daily part of people's lives. French life doesn't follow trends in the same way that it does in the US and the UK and Australia. People just don't change their purchasing decisions year on year because, this is the cool new thing. We're going to do brunch and avocados are out, but quinoa's in. It's like, no, we buy baguettes, we buy croissants, we eat this, we do this, we go on holiday this time of year, we do that. All of this is quite
fixed.
It's quite fixed because culturally it is, but also because it's culturally that there's that idea of, if you say that to a North American or someone from the UK, if you say, it's fixed by the government, so it's going to be fixed by, so the French people have to, but it's also the other way around. French people push back against change, and they push back against decisions by the government that would change that, which allow them to keep those tradition. And there's obviously a payoff, and there's like a really good example is in the center of Paris right now, when you talk about, this clustering. You're right. There's so much densely populated and densely packed into, especially the first 6 arrondissements in Paris. So the very, very center. And the French, at the moment, the French around Paris are in a bit of a standoff where the mayor, Anne Hidalgo, wants to pedestrianize and wants to consolidate a lot of the management of those first 6 arrondissements or districts in the center. And there's many, many, many people here who live here. The street that Le Red d'Or is on right now, you've got people living on all of these streets. In Paris, people live everywhere. You have the first floor is for retail and hospitality, and then everything above is various size apartments with the richer, the more affluent living on the lower apartments. And
why?
Because it's designed like that. So if you look on these buildings,
you'll see hot in the summer.
To an extent, but also because it's just the size of them. So these are all Haussmann style buildings. So it means that the first 2 floors are larger in ceiling, have higher ceilings. The 2 above that have a slightly smaller, and the 2 above that have even smaller. Exactly. And so because of that, you have people living here. Like Little Red Door, we have neighbors. We've had neighbors our whole time. But the people above us who live here are elderly French people. So if you say to them, we're going to pedestrianize this area, as a business, I think, great. This is awesome. The whole area is going to get easier for tourists. It's going to get better for pedestrians.
Pedestrianize mean no cars?
No cars. You just take away the roads. You would still have car access for deliveries, but you would cover the whole thing over. So that just like a lot of places have with COVID, you'd have more terraces, you'd have more people walking around, you'd have more things on the street, bands, music, etc. But if you're an elderly French person who's lived in the same building for 70 years, you're really against pedestrianization because you need car access to here because you don't have a lot of mobility. And so those are the kind of things where you have this standoff between innovation and evolution and tradition. And France is one of the few countries in the world that has such a strong sense of cultural tradition. It comes at a cost. Yes, you lose innovation. Yes, you lose some evolution. And it's a huge difference between doing business here in Paris. It's a huge difference between doing business here in France. But it's also one of the reasons why the French have so much culture to sell. I think if you look at somewhere like the UK and in France, we the UK, we're so proud of how much culture we export. We're such a huge exporter of culture.
Cultural mercantilism.
Yeah, exactly, right? We're so efficient at that. Like if you look at music, film, food, like we've created this post-colonial identity of we have this identity that's second only to the US in terms of export, in terms of like how many markets we penetrate, how many people we know of. And that, you know, the only people now who you can make comparisons to is like Korea are catching up quick because Korea have realized that. But France is silently huge. It doesn't change what it exports. It doesn't constantly evolve it. But everyone has champagne. Everyone has cognac. Everyone looks at French food as these like benchmarks of quality and luxury. And because it's built on heritage. And it's the same for French cinema and opera and all of these things, which, you know, that's why they quietly stay the center of luxury. Need to be loved by Parisians to be a Parisian bar? Do we need to be embraced by the industry here? And it's something that we still have. You know, we have internal conversations about what we can do and how we can do to be seen more favorably by the people, our peers and our colleagues around us. But it's something that was very difficult because Parisians didn't drink cocktails because it's not something the French necessarily embraced. When I say embrace, it's not that, you know, they wouldn't do it, but they have a very different attitude to the way the people in the UK and the US and Australia have with cocktails. French people come to a cocktail bar generally as an experience. But when I say experience, obviously there's an element of experience in every cocktail bar, but they don't necessarily value it.
The French don't value the art, the craft.
They go to it like you would go to like a Benihana's. Like they think it's a show. They think it's something to watch. They think that the thing in front of them, if you present them a cocktail, if it's presented really minimally and the liquid inside the glass is incredibly flavorful and really well put together and beautifully executed, but it doesn't have some kind of overt, over the top garnish or style to it, they're like, well, yeah, but you know, it's not as creative as like, oh, if you put this in a balloon and blah, blah, because that's what culturally, that's where most of the public in France are, because it's still finding its way to that point where it says, oh, this can be still seen in the same way as wine or food, because they have such a strong connection to wine and food and because they never embraced it. And, you know, like, again, when we're talking about the French are very careful to protect their traditions, their culture, they're very suspicious or very wary of external ideas, especially when they come from North America, because they want to protect what is seen as French. And so, yeah, it just made it a little bit harder for us to break through at that point.
I was having drinks with this Belgian guy the other day, and he said, in America, he said it in a thick French Belgian accent. He said, in America, you do it big. In Europe, we do it well. And I thought, that's right. There's diners in America where you go and they have everything. They have pancakes, hamburgers, pies.
Yeah, they do everything all day.
Yeah, everything all day, 24/7 diner. And you know, that's just what you need sometimes. But being able to say, look, I'm sorry, we don't have cars here. This is a two-wheeled vehicle. This is a Vespa shop. Look, we're the Little Red Door. We make these, you know, specialty cocktails. If you want a margarita, I'll tell you, you can get a great margarita, but we're not going to make, you know, we're not going to go, find Casamigos in the basement. I think that's important. Like, it also goes down to dedication of craft. It goes down to what we were discussing before about making art for the sake of art rather than art for the sake of what you know people will like.
It's a lot harder to take what we do and our attitude to how we respect what we do to America, because if you have a tipping culture, it's so much harder for an individual server to make that choice to say no, because they want tips, because they need tips to survive.
That's the economic model. Yeah.
Also, the same for the working model, right? Like everybody here works 35-hour week. We get tips from people, especially tourists who come from around the world, who culturally they always tip regardless of how much we tell them. The team here don't necessarily need tips to survive. Everyone here has a very high working wage. There's no concept of a living wage in France, for example, because the minimum wage is so high, because it's based off of the idea of what if this was a one income family of 2 children.
Yeah.
And so,
oh really?
Like, the only place that doesn't really work is in Paris.
Yeah.
So, we're able to do that because of the structure around us, because we have the confidence of a 10-year-old business that's very established, but also we don't have the pressures on individual staff members and on the bar as a day-to-day, that we can actually say to some consumers, we don't think you should engage with us in this way. And if you don't change those kind of wider factors and those influences around you, you can't have that attitude of make art for art's sake.